Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eileen Kazanecki. This is my multimedia curriculum project. A little bit about my class before we begin. I am a third grade teacher. My unit is designed around the BOCES ESP science kit that focuses on structures. I have 14 girls and 10 boys in my room, 3 IEPs. My class is made up of the speech and resource students, and it is the only classroom that does not have ELL mandated services. So I receive the ELL students that have tested out of services but still demonstrate needs of a typical ELL student. In this unit, I begin with a lesson on the scientific method. I then introduce structures. There are several exploratory lessons for structures, including clay and straws, skyscrapers with index cards. I bring my class to the makerspace where they demonstrate their understanding of structures and the components of structures through free exploration. I have several different assessments, and the culminating activity is when students build a Minecraft house. The technology used in this unit include PowerPoints, Google Slides, YouTube and Google Earth, Minecraft for educators. I use several websites such as Vocabulary and BrainPop Junior, and several formative assessment tools like Plickers and Kahoot. So like I said, the very first lesson I focus on is for the scientific method. It's an introductory lesson. Students really haven't received any formal science instruction at this point in the school year. This lesson takes 2 days. My goal for students, the objective is that they understand that science experiments have to be done in scientifically researched steps. It must be methodical, and they show this understanding through an exit ticket. So the scientific method lesson that I give is through the presentation of a Google slide. It's really engaging for students. It has the cartoon features. I go into what the basics of what science is. A lot of students know what a scientist is, but they have a preconceived notion of what a scientist might look like, and we go over the many different types of science. And it goes through the steps, beginning with asking a question, forming a hypothesis, conducting experiments, gathering data, drawing conclusions, and communicating results. I do teach them in third grade that they do not have to know, we do not begin with asking a question. We begin by forming a hypothesis because typically the question is already given to students. In the same lesson, we go through, there's a vocabulary video. Once students are comfortable with the steps, there's a vocabulary video where we stop and we analyze what Galileo's rationale is and what step he's on through this vocabulary video. There's also a BrainPop Junior on the scientific method. We do the BrainPop Junior and the scientific method quiz on the second day. We begin by reading a passage about the scientific method. The passage is here. We read this passage together and we highlight the vocabulary words, and then students partnered up and completed this interactive notebook activity. Finally, their exit ticket is a cut and sort in glue of the scientific method. Here's some examples of what students' work was. It's a very fast exit ticket, but it gives me a good idea of whether or not they know the steps. The first exploratory lesson is on clay and straws. This is a 2-day lesson as well. First, I introduce vocabulary of structures, and we set a hypothesis for their clay and straw structure. This is also a Google slide. They are responsible for knowing the vocabulary of this lesson, and then we go into building the structure. Their job is to work collaboratively to problem solve, and their goal is to get their structure to 35 centimeters. Here's my students at work. Many of them had lots of different ways to build their structures. Some were much more successful than others. After the structures lesson on clay and straws, students participated in a Plickers assessment. Overall, the score was 92%. I did have 6 students absent that day because it was a few days before Thanksgiving. My Plickers cards, here you'll see the generic Plickers cards. My Plickers cards I have written A, B, C, and D on the opposite side so that students do not have to constantly turn their cards over and around so that they confirm what letter they're choosing as their answer. Here is the slide of my Plickers results. It itemizes the students and how well they performed and which answers they got incorrectly. You can see the questions up at the top. These were just based on the basic scientific method and the preliminary structured knowledge that they knew from the clay and straws experiment. The next lesson was we had the opportunity to go into the makerspace. So knowing what they knew already about structures, their job was to apply their knowledge through the different centers we have in the makerspace. I have some pictures of the structures that some of my students built. Mostly they knew that it had to begin with a strong foundation. These were the magformer stations. This is a Lego station, block building station, and you can see that they really got pretty creative in that room. The third lesson was a 2-day lesson as well. It was about structures through skyscrapers. The first day we set up the scientific method of the hypotheses, and I introduced the new vocabulary for skyscrapers. The skyscrapers lesson is also through Google Slides. Their challenge was to work with a partner using just index cards to build a skyscraper up to 50 centimeters. On the second day, I took students on a virtual field trip to see some famous structures around the world. This website has lots of different Google Earth presentations that you can go to. I took them to the famous landmarks. Going to the Stonehenge. Stonehenge was one of the famous landmarks I took them to. This was their first introduction to Google Earth and spinning around, and we checked out many different sites on this website. Like I said, students were to build their skyscrapers up to 50 centimeters. Here's an example of my students' work. Once they realized that they had to fold the index cards to build a stronger base so that they could have multiple floors, they were much more successful. All students really start to lean the index cards on top of each other like a teepee. They realize that they can't build multiple floors, and they had a lot of fun problem solving. After their skyscrapers, they did a Kahoot where they partnered up with someone else. I borrowed the art room iPads. They took a Kahoot quiz. Here are the results from our Kahoot quiz. Overall, students did decently well. This was their first time using Kahoot. It was really fun for them. I think that it was a little more fun than they took it as a true assessment. Um, it was really fast. I realized afterward that I should have taken off the time limit for them to respond. I think that if I'd given them more time, it would have improved their performance. Finally, the culminating activity is I took students to Minecraft for Educators. This was a multi-day lesson in the computer lab. Our computer lab is being used right now, so I took them to the library. I introduced Minecraft and we went over the objectives and the rubric for their house. This is the rubric for their house. In order to have an excellent structure, there were specific dimensions that were a minimum. Their house had to have a roof and windows, a door, carpet on a floor, and one bed. They got extra for being creative. Here you'll see a creativity element. Once they begin their structures, I also had to teach them how to take some screenshots of their images. That was took a little while as well. Here you'll see an example of some of my students' structures in Minecraft. Overall, my students had a lot of fun with this structures unit. They loved the Plickers and the Kahoot, and they absolutely adored the Minecraft. I did not have too many students finish the Minecraft due to our time constraints, but showing them how to take screenshots was also pretty challenging. I would have loved to have a TA in that moment. I also learned that in Kahoot, I would be taking off the time restriction, and I think students would have performed more highly. But overall, I think it was tremendously successful, and I thank you so much.